Mr. Speaker, no, I would not remind you about rape at all. I would not remind you about rape.
Please. Honourable members, let us...
No, but Mr. Speaker, I don't mind addressing it. Because a false accusation was made on me. The matter was ventilated through the courts. Then through the High Court, the Court of Appeal. Then when they sought to bring it before a magistrate again, the family court, they said the complaint is frivolous, vexatious, and abuse at the process of the court. But one thing I know, I never stone church.
Let us stop this kind of train roads across the floor, please.
Mr. Speaker, you see, he did it once, and I allowed it to pass. So he thinks somehow I'm afraid of the subject. I'm not afraid of the subject. And I've addressed it on many times. But that is the kind of vile nastiness which is really unbecoming. But,
continue to be.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes we're in the same line going up to take communion, you know. You know? So.
Maybe
Mr. Speaker.
Maybe you need to be evangelicals.
Yes. So I hope I have put him to rest with that matter. He may yet raise it again. But he has to be worried about things what he's facing in the court below.
All right, Brian, let's move on with the debate, please. To deal with that otherwise.
No, because nobody has put a private criminal complaint against you. They can. It's an easy thing. It's an easy thing.
Honorable Senator, Honorable Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Continue.
No, I will.
No, I'm cautioning you. Kindly stop throwing these things across the table. Honorable, sit down for me, please. Continue. Continue your debate. Let me hear your point of order.
There are disparaging remarks being made about me, and I have a right to respond.
But I asked that let us. I don't know about the question. I have a right to respond. I say let us discontinue.
Mr. Speaker, there are disparaging remarks made about me, and I have a right to respond in this honorable House.
Hold on, sit down. It takes two to tango, and I ask that you, well, either of you, finish this conversation. If one would not give way, at least if the other does, then I can deal with the matter in a different way. But if each of you continue to throw words as across in a market square, then, I mean, it has to come to an end. Somebody has to stop. Not so?
Still remains. There are disparaging remarks which I need to respond
to. Honourable Prime Minister, could we continue the debate and let us just...
I'm obliged, Mr. Speaker.
End these disparaging remarks.
Mr. Speaker, one of the challenges with the NIS has to do with the increasing maturity of the plan, and is evidenced by the steady increases in the support ratio, the number of pensioners to active insured population. This is driven mainly by the longevity issue, where pensioners are living longer, and we have lower mortality rates among pensioners. And the future active population is threatened by the low fertility rate and rising outward migration. Point one. Secondly, the transition of the plan from a grants-based plan to a pension-based plan. This is because the insured persons are able to accumulate more contribution weeks, which makes an increasing number of pensioners eligible for a pension instead of a grant. Further, the rapid increase in the average pensions relative to insurable earnings. The average weekly pension in 2010 stood at $88 compared to $47 in 2001, which represents a growth of 87%. Mr. Speaker, there's also the drastic increase in expenditure. That is to say, the total expenses as a percentage of insurable wages during the review period. The expenditure rate increased from 4.3% in 2001 to 7.27% in 2010. It is to be noted that the expenditure rate of 7.27% is very close to the contribution rate of 8%. And Mr. Speaker, the generous design, which is also a main driver of pension growth, generous design of the plan. And there are two generous aspects of the design that are worth highlighting. The first, a front-end loaded design which provides pension entitlement for 500 weeks of contribution at a rate of 30% of insurable wages, effectively 3% per year. And after the first 500 weeks, pension entitlement is effectively 1% for every 50 weeks of credit, up to a maximum of 30%, making the maximum replacement rate of 60% of the insurable earnings. And also, pensions are calculated based on the best 3 contribution years of the last 15 years. And finally, Mr. Speaker, in this regard, the low contribution rate in the NIS. Our country has one of the lowest contribution rates in the region, second only to Jamaica, whilst providing a very competitive and dignified benefit package to the beneficiaries and their families. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the allied subject of poverty and public assistance. This has generated a lot of discussion during this debate. It is an amazing thing. Someone who is uninformed of this, on this subject, a gentleman who is on Nice Radio on Monday nights, is the first person to raise the issue that we have so many persons on public assistance because of the increased poverty in the country. I don't know where they get this from. First of all, Mr. Speaker, the data show that poverty has gone down. And the poverty rate has gone down both in relation to general poverty and indigence. And we use the same consultant which the NDP used, Kyrie Consultants out of Trinidad. In 1997, they found, Mr. Speaker, the consultants found that you had poverty at 37.5% of the population. And indigence, what you may call dirt poor poverty, of 25.7%. In 2008, which was not, Mr. Speaker, a very good year to complete your field work on a poverty assessment, with prices rising and oil prices at 147 US dollars a barrel in July of that year. Yet, despite the time when much of the field work was done, some was done before, Mr. Speaker, we saw a reduction of poverty, general poverty, from 37.5% to 30.2%. And for indigence, from 25.7% to 2.9% of the population. It means that when we arrived here in office, you had 26,000 persons living in indigence. Can't make ends meet, can't keep body and soul together, as we would say. And when the research was done, completed in 2008, it shows that we had moved to just about 3,000. We got to get those 3,000 away from indigents, and we have to also reduce the general poverty level. Mr. Speaker, how have we proceeded? And there's a logic in these things. We arrived in office, and when we arrived in office, we said that poverty and education, and addressing poverty and the education issue, they are the two priorities: poverty reduction and the education revolution, and they go hand in hand. And we went about them in a most focused manner. Mr. Speaker, when apparently there's some activity outside. Yes. Mr. Speaker, when we arrived in office, we said we would set about and have an interim poverty reduction strategy. We did a lot of consultations. We brought in a lot of experts. And having done that, we decided to apply the interim poverty reduction strategy. And when we had been applying it now for a good 6 years, I said to the Director of Planning, Laura Anthony Brown, I said to her, we should really assess how we are. Is our anti-poverty strategy working? Let's study it. There are people who said, but this is a risk. Suppose the numbers come out bad. I say, well, if the numbers come out bad, it means that our strategy was failing. We will get an idea as to the extent to which we are succeeding. And that is why we had the Kairi consultant study. Having done that now, and as a result of that study, Mr. Speaker, we are now engaging the Caribbean Development Bank. And we have the terms of reference, and I outlined those things in my speech, my budget speech, that what we do now is to develop a poverty reduction strategy paper arising out of the findings to see what other things that we should be doing. And that is how we have proceeded, and that is the way in which this government is addressing this question. Mr. Speaker, I heard it said by the Honourable Member for West Kingston that it would be good if we could have a reconciliation in the public granting of public assistance, doing things in social development. Mr. Speaker, this country is law-based. There's a Public Assistance Act. The Cabinet appoints the members of the Public Assistance Act, and they make the assessments. They work with the Permanent Secretary and the Minister concerned. Mr. Speaker, some persons may not want to believe this, but the gentleman who is the representative for the constituency of North Central Windward, Mr. Ainsworth Andrews, he's now there, I think, for 2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe a little more than that. I have never on one occasion said to Mr. Andrews, I want you to get Tom or Mary to go on. I have not gone to the Permanent Secretary. With me, in the case of poverty, I allow the professionals to do their work in respect of who to put on the public assistance. And from time to time, they will check the list on an ongoing basis to see that it is in order.